All right, welcome back, everyone. We just finished with the informative speeches, and now we're ready to move on to the persuasive speeches. But before we make that big shift, let me just let you know sort of what's coming up. Um, all of your speeches, I moved that due date now until Sunday, and as you can see from the top right of my screen, it is Sunday morning. So those will be due by midnight tonight. And so I don't have any feedback for you on those yet. I want to make sure that I get all those in tomorrow. On Monday, I'll just run through those, grade everything at the same time, and get that back to you hopefully by the end of the day tomorrow. If not, it'll be Tuesday morning. But that will give you the feedback you'll need there. I'll make another video as well that will talk about sort of the general feedback, what was overall good, not so good, could be improved, that sort of thing. And then, of course, you'll get your individual feedback as well. But for now, let's switch it over here. I'm going to shrink myself and look at this week. So we are on week 5 already. Can you believe it? There's only 7 weeks total, really 6.5 weeks. So this week we need to talk about persuasion and looking at your persuasive outline. And to do that, we'll need to talk about Monroe's motivated sequence because you will use Monroe's motivated sequence for your persuasive speech. Full stop. Let me say that again. You will use Monroe's motivated sequence for your persuasive speeches. Okay. So stick with me here. First thing we're going to do is talk about just persuasion in general, some things that you need to know as you prepare to effectively try and persuade an audience. Then we'll talk about Monroe's specifically and how you can use that as a tool, as an organizational structure to really make the most persuasive case you possibly can. Okay, so let's start out with chapter 9 and look at persuasion. Note that your persuasive outline is due at the end of this week. All right, let's jump down. It's page 33, I believe. Get down here to it. 31, 33, persuasion. So as we start thinking about persuasion, I think it's very important that we first know what persuasion is. We sort of have heard this term forever, so we feel like, we're pretty familiar with persuasion, and it's not a big deal, not a new idea. But really, the key thing that I want you to remember is that persuasion is an attempt to change something. So when you persuade people, or at least attempt to persuade people, you're trying to persuade them by targeting either their attitudes, beliefs, values, or behaviors. Now, there is that classic saying, of course, that people are like onions and that they have multiple layers. And if you think about what that might look like, you can think about sort of a bullseye with the concentric circles. If that's a cross section of an onion, then we know that as you get deeper, the onion gets a little stronger. And with that metaphor in mind, we can think of the attitude of people as the outer layer, right? So those are the easiest things that we can change. So, for example, if you were, going to buy a car and you really wanted a Jeep Wrangler and you had your heart set on a blue Jeep Wrangler because that's your favorite color, that's your attitude toward colors of Jeep Wranglers. You prefer blue. Now, if you come to the car lot and the car lot doesn't have any blue Jeep Wranglers, but they've got black Jeep Wranglers. Now, maybe that's not your favorite color. And if you tell me, as I'm the salesperson, that, this isn't exactly what you want, you were really looking for a blue one, then we can probably work something out. Let's say I gave you an extra $1,000 off the car because we didn't have the color you wanted. Would that change your attitude? Now, that doesn't mean that it needs to, now black is your favorite color over blue. It just simply means that your attitude about it can change from it has to be blue to, yeah, maybe I can do black, right? Because you now have that extra incentive. So you are persuaded to change that. Now, if you go one layer deeper within that onion or those circles, you'll get to beliefs. And beliefs are just what they sound like. We often think beliefs with religion, religious beliefs, or a lack thereof. And so with this one, imagine if someone came in to evangelize, basically, to try to get us to subscribe to their religion, one that none of us here subscribe to already. How might that work? Now, if someone came in and gave us a great speech on why their religion is true and why the others are not, there might be one person at the end of that 30-40 minute speech that are thinking, yeah, I want to, maybe I can do that, I'll give that a chance. But most people will not with one single speech. Most people will either hang on to what they have, if they have religious beliefs, or if they don't, then they'll hang on to that absence of belief. But if this person came back and saw us once a week and sort of over time convinced us that what they were saying had some merit, we might have 4 or 5 people that, again, don't run to change their religious beliefs or their allegiances, but they might want to at least know more. They might be intrigued, right? So now you've started to chip away at the belief system of people. And we see this a lot with political stuff right now, when what you believe is true or not. I mean, this is getting a little murky between attitudes and beliefs, because we might have an attitude toward Fox News that it is biased. We might have an attitude toward MSNBC that it is biased, or any of those sources that we looked at before. But really, what do we believe at the end of the day? Do you believe the election was stolen or not? Do you believe that there was this big fraud or not? And you've got to ask yourself those questions. But speeches can change beliefs, but they usually take some time. I mean, think about where people usually go and come away with religious beliefs. Church of some sort, right? They'll go in, they hear a message, they are inspired, or some would say divinely inspired, and they make a big change. Sometimes it lasts, sometimes it doesn't, but the persuasion is there. So now, if we see that attitudes are easy to change, they're on the outside. Beliefs, a little harder to change because they're closer to the inside, but it can be done. Then, if we go further in, we land on values. And values are extremely hard to change. Values are your enduring concepts of what's good, what's bad, what's right, what's wrong. And to change that takes a lot of work, but it can be done. Unfortunately, the best slash worst example we have of how speech can be made to change values is the Nazis, Hitler, and the Holocaust. When Hitler came to power, Germany wasn't an evil group of people that were waiting to, practice genocide. Instead, what happened was a series of speeches delivered by the Fuhrer there um, got them to that point. It started out with, okay, Germany is in a really bad place right now. We just lost World War I, and we are poor. We need to fix this. I'm going to look into it. Then they came back and would say, I looked into it. It looks like the banks are being irresponsible with your money. Let me check on the banks. I checked on the banks, and it looks like that they're not doing what they should be. And maybe it's a coincidence, but it looks like mostly Jewish people run the banks. Oh, I'm going to check into the Jewish people, and so on and so forth, until after a period of a couple of years, we saw what we know as the Holocaust in history. That was done through speech. Speech is powerful. But for us to have 1 or 2 shots at people for a 5-minute speech, we don't want to target values. We really don't even want to target beliefs. We want to target attitudes, or in some cases, behaviors, because behaviors, they're all laced throughout those circles, those layers of onion, if you will. If you are going to the drink machine, let's say we're back in class, in person on campus, and right before class starts, you say, "Hey, Carl, do I have time to go get a drink out of the machine?" I say, "Yeah, hey, you do, and here's $2. While you're there, grab me a Diet Coke." Okay, no problem. I just influenced, persuaded you to get that from me. But it wasn't hard. I mean, I gave you the money, I paid for it. I didn't ask you to pay for it, and you were already going. I didn't just call on someone and said, "Hey, would you go get me a drink?" So that was really easy to change that behavior. It just cost you an extra 5 seconds at the machine, but it probably gained you, notoriety, in my mind at least, when I'm grading things. Um, Other behaviors, obviously, the extremes, like we just discussed with Hitler, that takes a lot more effort and a lot more manipulation that, obviously we're not going to get involved with. So, if you want to change something about people and you want to persuade them, Try to change their behaviors and their attitudes. And they just give you, I think my favorite example of this is, it's so clear to see it, is recycling. If you are giving a recycling speech to a person or a group of people who maybe think recycling is pointless, there are those folks that just don't see the point and they don't want to spend their time doing it. But then you tell them, listen, it's not like you have to recycle everything. It's not like you have to have, a sorting station in your home where you put plastics and papers and, composts and all this together. All I'm asking you to do is to save your aluminum cans, your pop cans, your beer cans, whatever. Don't throw them in the trash. Put them in a separate bag. Keep them to the side. That's it. And if you can do that, you can get paid. So now what you've done is change the attitudes from it's pointless to maybe I could make a little money off this. And if they do it, you've changed their behavior to not recycling anything to just recycling cans. And guess what? You were successful. That's called incremental persuasion. It's not going from I think recycling is stupid to I want to start my own recycling business. It's these small incremental changes that build to a bigger, more meaningful change. Now, regardless of what you're trying to do in terms of change and persuasion, the key thing here that we have to remember is that you avoid coercion, and you see that on the list. Now, coercion is when you take away someone's free choice. It is moving beyond persuasion and into a taboo area, someplace we don't want to go. So the classic example of coercion is an armed bank robbery, right? Somebody comes in with a gun, they say, put all the money in the bag. The clerk, the teller, they have a choice, really. I mean, it's your life or the money. But whenever your life is one of the options, we think there is no real choice. And nor should there be. Give them the money. But what we want to do for our speeches in this class is make sure that we're not saying extreme outcomes will happen if you do or do not do something, like if you don't quit smoking cigarettes, you will die. Well, there's a few problems with that. I mean, the first problem, be right back, excuse me. Gotta turn on my power. The first problem is that if you do quit smoking cigarettes, guess what? You'll still die. We're human. That's the way life works. But it also doesn't necessarily mean that if you continue to smoke that you'll die from a smoking related illness, right? So we don't want to go and go extreme with that. Or even, well, if you don't do something to change the political situation in America, the next thing you know, we're all just going to end up in anarchy and our country will dissolve. That's the death of our country, right? So we want to make sure that we're not speaking in extremes so that we are going too far in trying to manipulate an audience, taking away their free choice, but we do want to make sure that we are being as persuasive as we possibly can. So, next up here, when you think of persuasion, the classic model of persuasion, whether you're going after attitudes, behaviors, beliefs, values, what have you, is that you will use the rhetorical triangle. Now, the rhetorical triangle is something that comes to us from the Greeks. Again, this is, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, where we learn that the best way to persuade people is to use a combination of approaches, and those approaches will center on ethos or credibility, logos, logic, and pathos, emotional appeals. And so let's talk about these for just a moment. With your ethos and the ethos of your speech, or your credibility and the credibility of your speech, aren't necessarily tied extremely close together. Here's what I mean. No matter what your speech topic is right now, you are likely not an expert on that topic. Because if you think back to our sources lesson, we know that to be an expert, you need to have one or more of three things. One is a terminal degree in a related field. Two is a certification of an expert status or something similar. And the third one is 20 plus years of professional experience related to that field. So while you may not be an expert, What you can think is that your speech can be an expert if it cites expert sources. So those people who are holding terminal degrees, who are professionals in the area or certified as experts. So when you cite good quality sources, those peer-reviewed journal articles, quality news sources, you are showing that you are credible, that you know what you're talking about because you have some experience, or more importantly, you're going to those experts that have that experience and you're just telling us sort of what they're saying. You're making the argument, but they're backing you up. Now, for logic or logos, it's just what it sounds like. You need to have an argument that makes sense. When you're trying to persuade anyone to do anything, the simplest argument is usually the best. If there are too many twists and turns, it seems convoluted, it seems too good to be true, or too complicated to work out right, you want to avoid that. That is not a good use of logic. Instead, stay simple and stay clear. And that's why you have to really follow, when we get to it next, Monroe's motivated sequence in the steps that it includes so that we can make sure we make sense. We are organized so that our audience sees we have our act together. The last element here of the rhetorical triangle is pathos or emotional appeals. Now, with pathos, you're really targeting the audience in a non logical, non credible way. You really just want them to feel something. Now, it's true, I think, that right now in our country, pathos is sort of the way that people are best persuaded right now. It's not a good thing. I think it should be logic most of the time. But if you can make people feel like something is the right thing to do, whether it is or not, you can often get them to do it. And people manipulate others a lot. We see this in government by leaving out, partial truths and details that might matter, and background context that might matter. We just want you to feel something. And I don't want you to just rely on feelings. I want you to have logic and credibility, but don't forget feelings as well. And so when you think about emotional appeals, there can be sort of negative or fear appeals. This is where you talk about, the bad things that might occur if nothing happens or if something continues to happen. Again, not extremes, not you might die, but well, with smoking, you could say if you continue to smoke cigarettes, you increase your chances greatly of contracting or developing a smoking related illness that often leads to cancer. That's different than saying, well, if you keep smoking, you're going to get cancer and die. It's more nuanced than that, right? So you have to be honest and truthful with that. So you could go fear appeals. You could do a positive appeal where you talk about how great things will be, or people will feel pride. People will feel excitement if they do something. We'll talk in a little while about the Arms of the Angel ASPCA commercial, where boy, they use a lot of emotion in that. But it works. They also have some logic built in and some ethos, but it's mainly emotion. They want you to help these animals. And so it works, but we want to make sure that above all, we don't only rely on positive or negative. We don't want to make people think that we're guilting them into something. So only negatives if you do or don't do something. That's not what people respond well to. They'll usually shut you down like, oh, I see a guilt trip. Or at the same time, we also don't want to only use positive appeals to these emotions, because then people will feel like it's too good to be true. You're blowing smoke at us. You're saying pretty rainbows and butterfly things that won't come true. Right? So we want to make sure that we balance out this triangle. Now, last thing I'll say about it is simply this: the triangle shape. The great Greek thinkers didn't come up with this because, oh, there's 3 points and there's a triangle has 3 points, we should use it. They use the triangle because if you look at the picture here, if you cut off one of those corners and things came disconnected, what happens to the entirety of that triangle? It collapses, right? I mean, you take one piece out and it falls in on itself. And so we want to make sure that we're aware that that is something that can happen, and we want to make sure that we don't let that happen because we balance out ethos, logos, and pathos. Now, let's zoom in for just a second on logic, because when we think about logic, there are often some bad uses of logic. And we want to talk about those for just a moment. These are called fallacies or logical fallacies, fallacious arguments. And there are well over 200 of these sort of logical fallacies. But we'll simply focus on this short list here because these are the ones that I see most often. I also want you to know these, not just so that you don't use them, but you shouldn't use these, but also so that you can be aware when other people do. You hear fallacies every day. People try to use these against you. Really, they try to use these to make you change the way you think or feel or believe about something, but they shouldn't because they're not good uses of logic. So the first one is ad hominem. That means to the man or to the person. And this is simply name calling. This is when a speaker, instead of going after their opponent's positions, they simply go after their opponent and they call them names. Might sound familiar. We had our last president who gave everybody he didn't like a nickname. Those are ad hominem fallacies. The second one here is a causal fallacy. This is huge because a lot of folks will say that A caused B to happen, but they can't give you any strong links between A and B. They just say it feels like A caused B to happen. You know, from a legal scientific view, that's why you cannot say smoking will kill you because, or even smoking causes cancer. Smoking contributes to cancer, but to say it's causal, A causes B, is a bridge too far. Do we think that's probably exactly accurate? Yeah, but we can't prove that, so we can't scientifically say it. That's why there's these lawsuits and the careful wording of warning labels and all that we have. More generally, if you've got a causal sort of thing, and you think of what caused different things to happen, you've really got to be able to back it up, and it's tough to do. So anytime you hear someone say that something caused something else, really break it down and think about it. The third fallacy is a slippery slope fallacy. If you envision this, it's like you're standing at the top of a slope, a hill, and it's icy. And so the fear is that if you take one step down that hill, you will fall down and slide all the way to the bottom. And this is used when we hear things like the old drug legalization arguments, like in Michigan, even when we were debating legalizing recreational marijuana. You would have folks say things like, we can't legalize marijuana in Michigan because if we do, the next thing you know, we're going to have a junkie on every street corner. What now? Junkies from what now? Oh, you're saying, and here's what's left out, right? If we legalize marijuana, then soon other drugs will become normalized and or legalized, and then you'll have harder drugs like heroin out there ruining people's lives, and then there'll be a junkie on every street corner. Well, that's a lot of steps past that one step we were talking about with legalizing marijuana. And that's the slippery slope fallacy. You used to hear it about same sex marriage back in the day. It would be like, oh, we can't allow that because if we do, then the next thing you know, you're going to have people marrying their pets and guys marrying their Porsches, and, it's just going to be crazy. And that's just not the case. The fourth one is a bandwagon fallacy. And this is where you say that because something is popular, it's right. Or because something is popular, it's best. If you're a sports fan, you're familiar with this because when you hear bandwagon fallacy, you think of, whoever was the hot team last year that won, whatever it is. Like right now, the Milwaukee Bucks, right? Just won the NBA championship. You're going to see Bucks fans that you've never seen before because they've never been Bucks fans before. I remember when Toronto won the championship a couple years ago. I saw Raptors hats everywhere all of a sudden. I was like, oh yeah, how long have you been a Raptors fan? Oh yeah, I mean for a while now. Sure you have. No, you just want the hat because they won the championship. I get it, but that doesn't make it a good reason to do something or to advocate for something simply because they're popular right now. An either or fallacy is a false choice. It's when you make it seem as though there are only two choices. You're either with us or against us. It's black or it's white. It's yes or it's no. And that's just rarely the case. Normally, there are multiple options. We just don't talk about all of them. So think about the pro life, pro choice debate. People on the pro life side, you would ask, when are they okay with abortion? And the answer should be never. And if you're on the pro choice side, it's when are they okay with abortion? And the answer is always, never and always. I doubt anyone listening to this, although I may be wrong, would say that it's never or that it's always okay to allow abortion. I can think of exceptions to these things. Okay, you say you never ever would do it. What about when the mother will absolutely die? What about when the child is already it's brain dead in the womb? What about when there's rape or incest? These sorts of things. So even like the most stringent pro-lifers could see often, not always, but often, there are some times where this might be a not such a bad thing. On the other side, pro choicers. So it's always okay? Yeah, it's always okay. You should always have that choice. Well, what if, the woman is already in labor and decides she wants to abort? Oh, well, yeah, that's probably not, a great idea. Yeah, what if it's like a form of birth control and this is number 24? Well, yeah, because that's probably going to hurt the mother's body. What about if it's designer baby abortion, where it's like, oh, we were finally able to find out the sex and it's a girl. We'd rather have a boy. Let's just terminate this one. What are the exceptions there? I don't know. They're different for everyone. But the point is, there's very rarely two clean sides. There's usually multiple sides, and we're usually in the middle. Very few people are extremes. All right, next up here, we've got the straw fallacy. A straw fallacy is one that sets up the opposition or the other side, the opposing argument, as so weak and easily defeatable that it doesn't really allow for a true understanding of that opposing argument. So we could go right back to pro life, pro choice. Pro lifers would look to the left and say, all those folks over there, excuse me, they're godless baby killers. Godless baby killers. Wow. But people will use that ad hominem, name calling, as a way to make the argument of the left seem so weak that it's easily defeatable. Now, it happens the other direction as well. People that are pro choice might look to the right and say, oh, yeah, the pro choicers, or sorry, pro lifers over there, they just want to be in charge of every woman's life and take us back to the 1500s. Like, wait a minute, hold on now. Or they're so stupid they don't even believe in science. That's true for some of them, I'm sure. Just like I'm sure some people on the left are godless people that are like, let's try to get rid of all the babies. But it's rare. It's so rare. It is not the norm. And so, no matter which issue we're dealing with or which side we are on that issue, we've got to remember that the alternatives need to be given a clear, fair, voicing of their argument so that then we can defeat it. It's only useful to defeat an argument, to refute an argument, if you first presented it fair and accurately. Next to last, we have the red herring fallacy. A red herring fallacy is when you are using distraction. So this comes from something that used to happen back in the old days, where you had people in debtors' prisons, and if they were in jail and they escaped, they would run away, and then the jailers would release the hounds, right? So if you got out of jail, you would run toward water. A couple reasons. One is if you would get in the water, your scent is harder to track. And two, while you're in there, find a fish like a red herring, rip it in half, and then throw it in two different directions, and you run in the other direction. This means that when the dogs get to the water, your smell fades, but what smell picks up? This nasty fish smell that's out in the sunshine, rotting. So now the dogs want to check it out. Meanwhile, while they're sort of hung up on the different smells, you're running away and making more time. And so that's the idea of a red herring. It's just a distraction. I had this on Facebook just the other day. I like to have political arguments on Facebook. I know I'm old and it's fun. But one of my friends that actually I went to high school with, she's an attorney now. She's conservative and I'm not. And we were talking about that. And basically, we were talking about the Senate testimony where Dr. Fauci and Rand Paul were going back and forth. And I said, that's not the way it works when you ask a question that you don't let someone answer. And she said, oh, I'm so glad that you've educated me on. We do this all the time. We're actually really good friends. But instead, she said, I'm so glad that you've educated me on debate. I wouldn't have known that from my law school experience. Like, oh, thanks. You know, she was calling me out, like, oh, thanks for mansplaining, basically. Um, and then I called her out. I was like, oh, well, that's a red herring fallacy. I never mentioned that this was debate. We're not talking about a debate, but you want to pull the rules of debate out and try to call me someone that's mansplaining this to you. Then you're going to bring the gender card in. I see what you're doing here. It's not going to work. And, you know, it was one of those things where we go back and forth and then we private message each other. And it's like, hey, yeah, that was fun. But the idea there again is simply that you don't want to distract with these whataboutisms. You hear it so much now, like, oh man, well, President Biden did this and it's terrible. What about when Donald Trump did that? And well, Donald Trump, he's great, yeah, but well, what about when Obama did this? And I mean, it would go on and on. So avoid getting off topic, stay on topic. And that's how you avoid red herring fallacies. The last sort of fallacy, you've seen it all the time, probably every day, and it is an appeal to misplaced authority. This is any celebrity TV commercial. Uh, Almost any, probably would be an accurate way to say it. But, you know, when you think of like all those people that do the proactive commercials, you know, Justin Bieber, for example, how many books do you think Bieber has read on? Well, you could stop there, but how many books do you think he's read on how to blend together chemicals to make the best facial astringent? None, right? None. Him, none of the others have read that. It's really, you know, this sort of farce. But people will often buy Proactive not because they, you know, want to try to clear their face up and they really think it might work, but because somebody famous uses something. And when we do this, it's an appeal to misplaced authority. Now, just because someone is in a commercial and they're famous doesn't automatically mean that it's an appeal to misplaced authority. Let's say that there's a doctor there when they come in and they're talking about, oh, yeah, no, this stuff really does work and here's how it works. And it works so good that we gave it to Justin Bieber over here and he used it. Here's what he thinks. Now the authority is back to the doctor, but that doesn't usually happen in these commercials. It's usually just the celebrity telling you what they like to use and that it works for them, and then we buy it. So, with this list of fallacies, again, there are many, many more. I will put a PowerPoint up that reviews these. That's just, goes through this list. It's a voiceover, so watch that. But you'll want to make sure that you're not using fallacies. What you will want to use are emotional appeals, except as you see they're highlighted as we've already discussed, don't use a single type. Don't go all positive or all negative. You can use fear appeals, you can use positive appeals. You can go after people's pride. You know, oh, you'll feel so good about yourself if you do this. You can guilt people a little bit, right? So, like the ASPCA commercial, like, why haven't you already tried to help these animals? You know what they're going through. I mean, it's just terrible. Anxiety, you know, being nervous. If you want people to get tested for STDs and, you know, they don't know if they have an STD or not, you can make them nervous, right? 1 in 4 of you has one. Is it you? Are you sure you've been thinking about getting tested? Why? Because you don't know, you've never been tested, or you haven't been tested recently? What do you think about the chances? Every day somebody finds out they're negative, that increases your chances of you being the 1 in 4. Then there's authority. This is when you bring in real authority like doctors, experts, and you cite them. And this is going to um, hopefully persuade your audience as a way of saying, oh, these people know more than I do. They're experts. I should trust them. Good luck with that one right now. All right, the last thing here is refutation or a preemptive strike. And so with this, refutation is when you know that the other side is going to bring up something, a counter argument to your position, your plan, your argument. And while this isn't debate class, if you know that the audience is going to be left with this sort of, yeah, but what about that thing? Go ahead and bring that thing up. So if it is the 1 in 4 STD rate, and you've got some males out there. So it's harder for males to get STDs than females. It's just because of the way we're built. And so if you, at least in heterosexual relationships, and so now if you say something like, well, I know what some of the men in the room might be thinking, right? It's harder for you to get an STD than women. And maybe it is, but let's face it, guys, we have a reputation for not making best decisions all the time, and it is still very possible to catch an STD just because you're a male. Doesn't much matter when you're thinking of yourself. I don't know, something that you might want to put out there so that that audience can deal with it because they're already thinking about it. Another example, let's see here, if we're thinking about why we should get better internet security, right? So you're thinking, yeah, but I don't have anything that anybody wants to steal. What are they going to steal? My debt? Yeah, I understand that, but once you've used these passwords and these go out, maybe in 10 years from now, you forget that you used that password once and you reuse it. Well, guess what? It's still out there. Some people will still know. You may not have anything now that people would want to steal or can steal, but you will eventually. And this will stick with you because, as they say, the internet is forever. Something like that, right? And so now you have motivated them to get rid of that thought that might be their hang up and really focus on what you're saying. So to review, we talked about persuasion briefly. It's trying to change attitudes, beliefs, values, or behaviors on some of those levels. We talked about ethos, logos, and pathos, as well as avoiding fallacies. Emotional appeals are good, just don't rely on a single style. And if there's something out there that's obvious that the audience will be thinking of, sort of on the other side of your argument, address it, get rid of it, move it out of the way, and move on. That's the persuasion lecture. More importantly, arguably, stick around. The next video will be on Monroe's motivated sequence. And this is crucial for passing or doing well on the next 2 speeches. Monroe's is what we will use, no exceptions. And so make sure that you tune in for that and learn how we use it. All right, I will see you then. Stick around and have a good day.